discussing coping with depression, specifically how you think affects how you feel. As a reminder, this presentation / webinar video is through the Counseling and Psychological Services Office. We are located on the 4th floor of the IU Health Center, and you can get in touch with us by calling 812-855-5711. The outline for today's presentation is going to be about us taking more of a cognitive strategy. So we're going to be exploring and identifying our own depressive cycle and symptoms so we have a more unique understanding of what that's like for us individually. Really work to thoroughly question how our depressive cycle may be contributing to our overall distress. Understand emotional control strategies, and discuss cognitive distortions and some good Socratic questioning tools to be able to help pull ourselves out of that. Now, today's presentation will function very, very similarly to any of the live presentations you may or may not have attended before. So it should be about 30 to 45 minutes, depending upon how long you take. There will be a series of journal prompts, so you will actually need something to write with, whether you're typing that on a computer, on your phone, or actually physically journaling that with pen or pencil and paper. We want to ensure that you are actually participating in those activities. To ensure that you have ample time to do that, what you'll be asked to do is just to pause the video, take the time to record your responses, and then press play when you're ready to continue. So first things first, I like to start out every presentation by helping individuals understand just what their experience is like with whatever mental health concern we're discussing, be that depression, anxiety, stress, or whatever have you. So before we dive into ways that we can effectively cope and increase our basic self-care strategies, we do want to understand what depression is and what our individual cycles look like. So oftentimes I hear people describing feeling depressed as something that's just like a big overwhelming mess that's really hard for them to identify. It's really challenging to take a conceptualized approach and question, okay, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How am I behaving? And how do all of those things link together in a way that actually perpetuates my depressive experience rather than helps it? So my hope is that in further slides, we're going to be able to break that down a little bit further for you. Additionally, that cycle of depression can move very, very quickly, and it can be very difficult for us to press pause and just step back and identify, hey, what's going on here? And how does all of the above symptoms really come together in a way that contributes to my depression, either positively or negatively? So my hope is that we're going to be able to start identifying what our individual cycles of depression look like. I really appreciate this chart. It's taken from the Instagram, What is Mental Illness? Because oftentimes I will have individuals come into their therapy sessions or their triage appointments for the first time and describe themselves as being lazy or have a lot of really negative connotations when they think about the idea of possibly experiencing depression. Now, depression is actually a list of all of these symptoms and then certainly some more after that. But these are just some fairly generic symptoms that people can experience. A loss of interest in daily activities, appetite or weight changes, unexplained aches and pains, so definitely some physical symptoms, feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, anger or irritability, sleep changes, loss of energy, self-loathing, so any of those more self-deprecating thoughts, concentration problems, reckless behavior. Certainly there's low mood in general. Something else that's not listed in here is thoughts of suicide or self-harm, excessive guilt, lots and lots of symptoms. So it goes far beyond just this idea of being lazy or feeling sad. So certainly I encourage you to question, what symptoms are you identifying with? So as we think about those symptoms further, when an individual experiences them, it can bring about some pretty drastic changes to their life, to their routine, to their behavior, so on and so forth. However, we find that it is the behavioral changes that can often make the depression worse, and it can actually prevent an individual from being able to cope effectively and therefore experience whether it's a drastic or a slight reduction in symptoms. So I just want you to pause and question, how do your thoughts impact your feelings? Just question that for a second. And then question, furthermore, how does that impact how you behave? And I will break this down a little bit further, as we know that there's a link between all three, and they can definitely trigger and kind of have this pinball effect on one another. So if we think about a common symptom of depression, as we discussed on that chart earlier, one of those common symptoms is low energy and decreased motivation. So if an individual is starting to feel relatively depressed and they're feeling low energy, they're having decreased motivation, this can cause someone to think or feel, okay, hey, I need to cut back on some of my tasks and responsibilities to effectively cope. Well, if we're cutting back on our tasks and responsibilities, that might lead us to not getting our assignments done as quickly, perhaps not engaging in social interaction, perhaps not going to the gym or doing some other sort of self-care strategy because, again, we're feeling lower energy, a decreased motivation. So we think, hey, I need to listen to what my body's saying. I need to cut back on these things. Now, if that cycle begins, that can often lead to what we call the cycle of depression. So that low energy and fatigue can lead to decreased activity or the neglect of any responsibilities. And then both of those things can lead to increased feelings like guilt or even some hopelessness overall, thinking that you're ineffective or inadequate. There's lots of self-deprecating thoughts that can come from there, and that only perpetuates that depressive experience further. As you can see, that cycle can start to move very quickly. If somebody's starting to question their effectiveness, that can lead to increased feelings of guilt, and the more guilty that somebody might feel might increase anxiety overall socially, which might lead them to not wanting to engage in that social experience. And as you can see, it can just start moving really rapidly. So our hope is that we can begin identifying what our own cycle of depression could look like in an effort to, number one, identify our own depressive triggers because they're all individual. Number two, identify and understand how we may be responding to the depression in a way that actually perpetuates it and causes us more distress rather than helps it. And then really question intentionally what could be a more helpful behavior or thought for me to integrate here. Now, let me put out a disclaimer. This is very challenging. I do not expect this to be easy. After you look at this, if you're rolling your eye and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, okay, Caps, this is much easier said than done. Absolutely. But the challenge is if we can actually slow that down and begin identifying, hey, what's happening in my body, in my mind, what I'm feeling, how I'm behaving, what does that all look like? And how does that contribute together? And how can noticing and developing that insight help you notice it more in the moment and help you begin questioning where are just very, very tiny entrances for me to try doing something even just 5, 10, 1% different. So if we utilize this model, what I want you to really do is question what situation came up? Where were you? What were you doing? When did this happen? Who were you with? What did you feel anxious or depressed or emotional about? And a lot of this says anxiety, but for the frame of this, I want you to think about depression, though certainly we know that anxiety and depression can kind of go hand in hand. So physical, really question what's happening in your body. So that low energy, perhaps you do experience physical symptoms of anxiety as well. Maybe you get tension headaches, anything of that nature. So what are you noticing in your body? What physical sensations are you experiencing? Cognitive, question what went through your mind when you felt depressed or felt anxious or somewhat upset, however you choose to label it. So really write down those actual thoughts. What did those thoughts say or mean about you or mean about how you are interpreting yourself or the situation? So really write them down. If you're thinking, I'm worthless, I am a horrible human being, I'm a terrible friend, I'm never going to be able to get through this, I should, insert any type of should statement there, lots of different thoughts like that. Really question, and you can do this more generally or specifically to a situation. What are those things that you're thinking when you are feeling more depressed or anxious or whatever that emotion or experience is? Behaviorally, what was your first instinct or automatic response? What did you do or what did you try to avoid? Perhaps you sleep all day, you neglect your responsibilities, or maybe you put yourself into your work even more so. What does that look like behaviorally? Is there an engagement and any increase in substances? Is there any self-harm, any suicidal thoughts or actions that come up? Behaviorally, what is that experience? And then emotionally, and I encourage you, Google search an emotion wheel if you need it. What emotions come up for you when you feel anxious, depressed, or any other type of mental health symptom? Are you feeling dejected, numb, guilty, embarrassed, ashamed, sad, angry, frustrated? The list can go on and on. And then once you have this written down, I want you to look at it and really question, how do all of these things go together? And then begin to move very, very quickly into triggering that overall depressive cycle. So I want you to pause the video to record your responses, but question, how does this cycle possibly perpetuate someone's experience with depression? Or journal it for yourself. How does this cycle possibly perpetuate your experience with depression? And how do you think this cycle might start to move really quickly for you? Again, as with any journal question, I want you to pause the video, record your responses, and then press play when you're ready to continue. Now I want you to also journal, what are some examples of your depressive triggers? Is it specific people, specific situations, locations, time of day? Maybe it's very specific classes, very specific things that people say or do, certain thoughts you think. What are some examples of your depressive triggers? What is the biggest contributor, do you think, to your cycle of depression? Is it your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior? What is that kind of more pesky part of that cycle that you feel like is going to be the most difficult to let go of, or might contribute to how quickly that cycle moves? What could be a more helpful thought or behavior that might ultimately slow your cycle down? So really start questioning, if you were going to wave your magic wand and intervene on this cycle of depression overall, where would likely be the most helpful place for you to intervene, and what would that look like? Again, pause the video to record your responses, and when you're ready, press play and we can continue. So now we're going to move into more of the cognitive piece of today's video presentation, and this is really focusing on how our thoughts get in the way, because our thoughts are incredibly powerful, but they are what they are. They are just thoughts. So humans are hardwired to engage in the common cognitive distortion, for example, all or nothing. And we'll talk more about specific cognitive distortion soon. But basically what this means is we believe that we have to be able to do something 100% of the time, all the way, or we can't do it at all. So it can contribute to some of the following beliefs or thoughts. And this is certainly just a couple of them, not all of them. So it's either I succeed or I fail. I'm either smart or I'm dumb. I'm either depressed or I'm happy. I'm either a good kid or I'm a bad kid. I'm a good friend or I'm a bad friend. I'm a good student or I'm a bad student. I'm either good at this or I'm bad at this. As you can see, again, it's very black and white, all or nothing, this or that. And that's just often where humans tend to lie, is kind of feeling like it has to be one or the other. And so my challenge for us as we get going into this is being able to develop some good strategies, or begin thinking about some good strategies we can use to catch ourselves in those cognitive distortions and utilize some cognitive strategies to be able to hopefully pull ourselves out of it. So another journal prompt, before we continue, I just want you to consider the following. This should hopefully kind of set us up for the strategies we will be discussing further. I want you to question, what types of all or nothing thoughts do you engage in? And then when those thoughts come up, what do you notice about your mood? What happens? How are you feeling? And then what does this make you want to do or make you not want to do? So if you're thinking, I am either a good student or I'm a bad student, what happens? How do you feel? Do you feel overwhelmed? Are you putting pressure on yourself? Does this make you want to dive all into your schoolwork or pull back entirely? What does that look like? Again, with all of the other journal questions, pause the video, record your responses, and when you're ready, press play and we can continue. As we continue talking about how our thoughts get in the way overall, and just for the sake of today's workshop, I want you to challenge yourself to catch catch you in those all or nothing thinking patterns when they come up. And I promise you that they will come up during today's presentation. So if that comes up for you today and then beyond today, I want you to engage in this cognitive reframe. And I do encourage you, if you think this could be helpful for you, take a screenshot of this right now or pull out your phone and take a picture. Here's the reframe. Happiness is not about feeling good all the time. Instead, it's about the ability to feel what you feel without the struggle to get rid of it or change it. So that's my challenge reframe for you today. So notice when those all or nothing thoughts come up, or when you're finding yourself feeling like you need to be happy all of the time, and if you're not, then you're failing, whatever have you, whatever cognitive distortion related to all or nothing's coming up. I want you to engage in that reframe, because ultimately what we're challenging ourselves to do when we're engaging in these cognitive strategies is about trying to create more flexibility in our minds, to create more flexibility about how we see an emotion, how we see happiness, our interpretation of depression, like really questioning how we're looking at those things and creating flexibility about how we see a situation, how we respond to it, so on and so forth. So we want to create more of a flexible mindset and certainly just notice when we're in more of that rigid type of thought. Now, another important component of this is depression and control. I talk a lot about this when it comes to anxiety, but it does come up quite a bit also with depression. So basically, everything that we do as human beings is an attempt to increase whatever good thing it is that we're experiencing. So if that's a good emotion, a good thought, a good behavior, to increase that good thing and decrease the bad ones, which means that we're kind of stuck in this chronic pattern of emotional control, which is primarily motivated by avoidance. So it's, what can I do physically or emotionally to make myself feel good? What do I need to avoid? What do I need to add? So on and so forth. So that could be, adding substances, thinking about suicide, isolating ourselves, engaging in chronic anxious thoughts or depressive thoughts. So everything that we do, whether we know it or not, is usually very intentional and is usually a result of that emotional control pattern. Now, here's the tricky thing. Not all of our emotional control patterns actually help us and increase those good emotions. In fact, a lot of times it can perpetuate that depressive or anxious experience. So today I want to encourage you to open up with a less judgmental mindset and really just be open to questioning those behavioral and cognitive patterns in an open and judgmental way. Questioning, how is this thought or behavior helping me? How is it enriching my life? And how may it be contributing to my cycle of depression? And just be very willing to, again, open up and recognize that sometimes these things that we do can actually help us, but there's that very slippery slope to when it stops helping us and it actually starts hurting us and perpetuates that very thing that we do not want to be experiencing. So I want you to question, what are some thoughts or behaviors that you engage in to attempt to control your depression? And then how does this help you in the short term? And how does it help you in the long term? That's a really important link, is being able to open your mindset up to question not only how it helps you now, but also how do you expect that that's going to help you later or not help you later? As always, I want you to spend some time, journal your answers, and when you're ready, you can press play and we can continue. As we begin moving and further just discussing this idea of our depression and our emotional control strategies and trying to avoid that thing that makes us feel really bad, what I want you to think about as a strategy is just whenever you're approaching a thought or a behavior, whether that's before you're doing this thing or thinking that thing or after you've already engaged in it. So that's a really important thing too. A lot of the thoughts you experience are automatic. So this idea of intervening on it before it happens might not be likely. So if you notice that you're having that kind of all or nothing thought or that anxious thought or depressive thought, and you're noticing, okay, I'm trying to control how I'm feeling, or this thought is not helping me, or this is a depressive thought, whatever have you, whatever pops up in your mind, I want you to pause and question, what am I doing or thinking right now? How has this helped me in the short term? Or how will this help me in the short term? How has this or how will this help me in the long term? And what does this thought or behavior cost me? So what does it cost me now? What's it going to cost me later? And what type of thought or behavior could connect me to the life I want to lead? Or what thought could be more representative of the situation at hand? So let's say, I'm going to give you an example of this. Let's say you're having, the thought, either I'm a good student or I'm a bad student. I have to get 100% on this paper. And that's leading you to feeling really anxious and just way too anxious to even sit down and get your work done. So really questioning, what am I thinking right now? How is this thought helping me in the short term? You might answer I think that it's going to be more motivating. I think that it's going to help me connect to my value of wanting to be a good student. Versus how is it connecting and helping you in the long term? You might recognize it's not. It's actually convincing me that I am a bad student, or it's making me feel like I can't actually get my work done, or, something along those lines. What does this thought or behavior cost me? You might notice that it costs you just a true representation of how you actually are as a student. It might cost you feeling good emotions or experiences in that class because you're so preoccupied with either being perfect or not good enough at all. Again, these are just examples. And what type of thought or behavior could connect me better to the life I want to lead, or what thought could be more representative of the situation at hand? So it could be, hey, it's really important to me that I am successful academically. Because I know it's important to me, what do I need to do? Hey, I'm really putting a lot of pressure on myself because I know I want to be a good student because of these things. Here's what could probably help me more, something along those lines. So again, this is about just being willing to open yourself up, create some insight, and just being willing to question your cycle overall and how this might be contributing to the distress you're experiencing. So I want you to journal. What do you do to attempt to think your way out of your depression or your anxiety? What do you do behaviorally to help reduce your depression? And how do either one of these strategies help you? And I do encourage you to question, how does it help you in the short term or in the long term? And when you are ready, please press play and we can continue. So as we're getting ready to discuss our thought strategies, again, I just want to continue to remind you, all of this is so much easier said than done. And while it might be ideal to just be able to flip all these negative thoughts or difficult thoughts that you experience on its head and just stop that from occurring and just think something different, that's not likely. In fact, I often hear a lot of my students saying how frustrated they get when people are like, well, just stop thinking that way. Think something different. Think on the bright side, anything along those lines. So because we know that that's not realistic, we want to find more true and representative ways to respond. So instead, we want to be able to just question their thoughts, question them in an open and non-judgmental way, be able to question, what's the authenticity behind this? What is the accuracy of it? And then from there, once we can kind of question that and sit in any of that dissonance that might come up, we might be able to question, hey, what are some other thoughts that might actually be more accurate or representation of the situation at hand? So it's more so just trying to open them up instead of flipping it on its head, and being willing to do that in a non-judgmental, open sort of a way. Overall can be far more helpful than just saying, stop thinking that, think something different. Because we all know if we could do that, we would have done that by now. A great tool that I love to encourage people to utilize for this is Socratic questioning tools. So this was actually taken from, I believe the website is therapy worksheets or psychology tools, something along those lines. But if you just Google search Socratic questioning PDF worksheet, you'll get one that pops up. And this is only a portion of it. So this is just an example of it, is you might put up, what's the thought to be questioned? The thought might be, I'm a failure, or I have to get 100%, or I'm not going to be a good enough student, or I don't think I can do this, I'm going to fail out, something like that. It's looking at that thought and being able to just question, okay, so what's the evidence for this thought? What is making me believe that this thought is true? And what is the evidence that negates it? Just being very open to questioning both sides. Questioning, am I basing this thought on fact or on feelings? Being able to kind of decipher that difference can be really helpful. Is this thought black and white or all or nothing when the reality is more complicated? And I encourage you to pull that out. Like what does make it more complicated? What are you missing? What evidence are you misinterpreting? What assumptions are you making? Again, questions that really just pull this thought apart. It's not saying let's flip this thought on its head. It's just saying like, let's really look at it. Let's look at what's contributing to this. And is this actually representative, or are there certain things that I'm missing because I'm finding myself engaging in more of those cognitive distortions? So this is a great tool and strategy for you to use. I just encourage you, feel free to Google search Socratic questioning tools or bring it up to your therapist, and they will likely be able to help you with that. So as you're pulling that apart, you're probably going to notice yourself engaging in some of these cognitive distortions. And again, we talked about that one all or nothing at the very beginning, but there are so many more. And this is just really the tip of the iceberg. In a different presentation on anxiety, I go into this a lot deeper, where I'm talking about just what that looks like and strategies that go impair individually with each of those cognitive distortions. So I do encourage you to check out that video if you're wanting some more detailed approaches to that. But here is just an example of some filtering. So really only noticing part of what's happening, which is why Socratic questioning can be so helpful. So I'm only noticing all the red marks on my paper. I'm not noticing any of the positive remarks. Polarized thinking, we've already talked about this a bit, the all or nothing. The control fallacies, so either believing that we have to blame everybody else or we can only blame ourselves, like being really willing to find our sole blame and responsibility in literally everything, taking responsibility for, it being rainy outside on a day when you scheduled a picnic or you wanted to go for a socially distanced walk with a friend, something along those lines, and really accepting blame and responsibility even in spaces where you don't have any. Fallacy of fairness, assuming that life should be fair, and any time that it's not, what's wrong with me? Catastrophizing, so really kind of working through and going to that worst case scenario, kind of going from 0 to 60, minimizing the positive, really blowing up the negative. And as you can see, some of these go together fairly well. Heaven's reward fallacy, expecting self-sacrifice to be rewarded. Always being right, being wrong is unacceptable, being right supersedes everything, so again, likely catastrophizing and filtering out any time that you're wrong or blowing up any time that you're wrong. Personalization, so assuming that you are responsible for anything and everything, even when you're not. And as we continue, overgeneralization, emotional reasoning, so if I feel it, it must be true, believing that your feelings are facts, I feel stupid, so I must be stupid. Fallacy of change, so expecting other people to change. Shoulds are a big one. So I should be better at this. I should be smarter. I should be able to feel better, so on and so forth. Jumping to conclusions. And that one you can even expand further. There's some mind reading that can come in. Jumping to conclusions / attempting to read somebody's mind and deciding how they do or don't feel about you. Blaming, so either at other people or at yourself. And then global labeling, so extreme generalization, like everybody hates me, so on and so forth like that. So I know I went through those really quickly. This is from the Positive Psychology website. And if you Google search again, cognitive distortions, you're going to find a lot of them and even likely some more. But if you think that this would be helpful for you just to understand, hey, what are those cognitive distortions I'm engaging in? I do encourage you to spend some more time even beyond the journal strategy that we're going to look at next to be able to question it and to be able to challenge yourself to notice it when it comes up. So as you think about those cognitive distortions from the slides previously, which ones do you typically engage in? How do you think they contribute to your depressive or anxious or just mental health experience overall? And how can you utilize Socratic questioning to find more authentic and representative thoughts? And when you're ready, feel free to press play and continue on with the presentation. So those were the main strategies that I wanted to discuss. And again, there's so much more that you can really go into and dive into. And this is just the peak of the iceberg. So if you found this helpful, I do encourage you to continue doing more work on this yourself by either tuning into the live or pre-recorded versions of this. By either seeking individual therapy out, perhaps you want to do a group therapy option, or even, do one of our 3-week group workshops as well. There's lots of great work that you'll be able to do to dive in deeper to this work overall. But certainly I do want to touch on how you're able to determine if additional services are needed. So if there's ever any increase in other mental health symptoms overall, a change in your sleep, your appetite, your hygiene, any changes to your personal functioning, academic functioning, social functioning, and then any of those thoughts of suicide, harm to self, harm to others, those are all good indicators that seeking additional services would be necessary. So I do want to just briefly touch on what additional services are available to you at the IU Student Health Center and CAP specifically. Now, what I do encourage you to do is at any point, please check our website for the most updated information as we've had to navigate COVID-19 and even beyond COVID-19. Our changes of resources and availability obviously will change due to what our students are needing and what's just going on in the world in general. But we do offer individual and group counseling. We have that during the COVID-19 concerns via video or phone. And then beyond COVID-19, we'll offer face-to-face services as well as telehealth still. We have after-hours crisis line and emergency appointments available. You can call 812-855-5711 and after hours select 1 to be able to talk with someone. And that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you're really distressed at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, it's an emergency, you can't wait to call Monday, or you can't wait for your appointment in 2 weeks, please give us a call. We're there to be able to help you determine what you're needing. Now, when we are open, we'll still have those appointments available. Again, in the midst of COVID-19, those emergency appointments are going to be available via phone or video. And then outside of COVID-19, we will have physical emergency walk-in services available. Free drop-in appointments, which relate to our Let's Talk Now program. Now, please know that emergencies are always going to be best served at our emergency walk-in or emergency video/phone call appointments. Sexual assault crisis counseling and other free workshops. We have a mindfulness one. We have other online workshops just like this, and so on and so forth. So lots and lots of resources. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by this, that's okay. I encourage you, if you think that additional services could be necessary or helpful for you, call 812-855-5711, ask to schedule an appointment. And through that initial appointment, you and that counselor will be able to really dissect what it is that you're needing, and they'll be able to make recommendations for you based on that. As mentioned, our Let's Talk program is really aimed at serving typically underserved and underrepresented demographics or students. So our Let's Talk Now program, this is typically located at various places around campus. Usually you're able to view the website, see where someone's located, what times they're available, and you show up without an appointment and you just get to talk. You just get to let's talk right now. Now, obviously, I want you to view our website to be able to get the most accurate and up-to-date information about how things are being impacted by the global pandemic or how things are not being impacted. Let's Keep Talking is a more formal counseling program, but again, that serves our traditionally underserved students. That's usually located at our Asian Culture Center, La Casa, Neil Marshall, Group Scholars, DEMA, Office of International Services. Now, in light of COVID-19, all of those services will be remote. But if you still identify with one of those cultural centers, you are able to technically see that counselor that would usually be located at that cultural center. And then certainly when things go back to being face-to-face, you are able to physically see them at that center as well. Again, please check our website for the most up-to-date information. And then our sexual assault crisis services. So this is free counseling services available to anybody who has experienced an assault. Certainly includes, but not limited to, all of those that are listed below. So this is an extension from CAPS. It's staffed by counselors who are specially trained in working with individuals who have experienced trauma, sexual violence, sexual assault. So if you think that that could be important for you to discuss or a part of your treatment, you can certainly see an individual who specializes in that. Now, what is important for me to mention is you don't have to know any of this right away. If you're confused about what you might want, again, just feel free to make that initial appointment, and that therapist will help you work through what service options will be best available to fit your needs. Now, our SAC services include individual, group, couples counseling, support groups, psychiatry care, information and assistance with medical, judicial, or legal issues. They do have an after-hours crisis line that you're able to call. Please note that crisis line is different than CAPS's crisis line right now. Their crisis line is 812-855-8900, and these services are available for all genders and all identities. And last but not least, there is a Center for Human Growth, which is another counseling service option available on our campus. They are through the School of Education, and they certainly have some similarities and some differences to what we as CAPS can provide. So if you're interested in exploring other counseling service options at IU, please feel free to call their phone number, 812-856-8302, or visit their website to, again, get the most updated information about their services and what they are and are not able to provide. That is the end of today's presentation. I do encourage you continue to explore our video library in the future, or log on to any of our live workshops to get additional information and good psychoeducation on various mental health topics.